Grace, mercy, and peace to you, Internet, and welcome back to Lutheran in a Strange Land. This is part 8 of our series on cultivating chastity, and as we talked about way back in part 4, there are really two components to any virtue, including chastity. First, there is the knowledge that you need to be able to distinguish right from wrong, to know what right is, to know what wrong is, and to be able to tell the difference when you look around yourself and when you look at yourself. But the second component to any virtue is the practical wisdom and discipline that are required for actually conforming your behavior to that knowledge of right and wrong that you have. It's not always simply a matter of good intentions. In fact, it's usually not a matter of good intentions when it comes to virtue. It takes practice. It takes discipline. And we have now spent a lot of time on understanding right and wrong when it comes to sexual morality. And now the time has finally come to turn our eye to acquiring practical wisdom. In other words, how can a Christian be chaste in an unchaste culture like ours, now that we know what that really requires as far as morality goes? How can we fulfill our sexuality in marriage without falling into fornication? And the answer isn't some simple but powerful system. Okay, it's not good intentions, and it's certainly not just hoping for the best, which is, of course, what too many people have been doing, and the results of that are plain to see. The answer, if you can call it the answer, is simply a multitude of small but important steps that Christians can take to change their lives and to begin to change course in the way that they behave. And I'm not making any claim here to give you all of those small, simple steps. There are probably an infinite number of them. And I certainly am not qualified to do that. I don't have that kind of practical wisdom myself. But we're faced with the challenges that we're faced with, and we have to start somewhere. And what I can give, at least, are some starting points. Advice that can help point us in the right direction, so that we can start to put in the work of rebuilding what prior generations have torn down. All the know-how, the wisdom, and the rituals, if you will, and customs that help guide people into healthy marriages. So a few caveats about the list before we begin. First, this is, despite what I just said, this list really is less about how to fix society. And it's more about how an individual person can maximize his or her own chances to successfully marry. In the long run, I think that really is what's going to help change society. The future belongs to those who show up for it. In other words, the people who successfully have strong families, who rise to these challenges that we're facing, and are able to have kids and pass on their own wisdom that they acquired to that next generation, those are going to be the people who will help change society in the long run. But in the short term, changing society is not going to help us. We live where we live, and anything that goes about like, we need to change society so that we have more value, put more value on this or less value on that, that's going to take a lot longer than we would like to. And, fertility doesn't wait forever. Marriage doesn't wait forever. We can't wait for society to change. We have to rise to the challenge that we're presented with now. And which is why the other thing you're not going to find on this list is anything along the lines of, we need a law that says this, that, or the other thing. Now, don't misunderstand. There are actually there are all sorts of laws on the books that do negatively impact family formation. Okay, that's very true, especially if you look at the family court system in particular. That needs to be radically overhauled. But what I do mean is that most laws that would make a difference are not yet practical to implement. Again, that's just wishing and wanting at this point. It's not going to help you immediately. It's not going to help you within the next 5 or 10 years, probably. We live in a republic, and that means that the laws always lag behind the good sense or the lack thereof of the population. It's not the other way around. Laws are not going to bring us back to anything good. We could have better laws, but we have to realize why we need better laws first, and we're simply not there yet. Once we do that, once we learn how to fix our own problems instead of having the government do it for us, then that is when we turn our eye to fix the laws so that we can help others do the same. Second caveat on this list. Most of this is not law in the biblical sense. In other words, I am not saying, "Thus saith the Lord," to most of the stuff on this list. There are a couple exceptions, but for the most part, no, this is not what the Bible says. This is not what God has said to any of you. As we said back in part 5, the Bible does not endorse any particular methods to finding a spouse. It doesn't demand that you date. It doesn't demand that you court. It doesn't demand that your marriage be arranged, and doesn't forbid any of those things either. We have a great deal of Christian freedom when it comes to that. That said, we need wisdom to use that freedom well. And if you are interested in taking on this enormous task of developing the virtue of chastity or helping others to do the same, then you would do very well to consider the things on this list seriously, even if it's not "Thus saith the Lord." Third caveat. Please do not get obsessed over any single point on this list to the exclusion of anything else. Virtue is not easy. It's certainly not that easy. If you can do one thing right, you get it all right. And there are a whole lot of factors to weigh and balance together in a task like this. You need to be able to use your own mind. You need to be able to pray for wisdom and in how best to emphasize each item in comparison to all the other items. And it's even going to look different from person to person based on the different circumstances that you encounter. And what's more, you don't get to choose your own characteristics. Not entirely. And you don't get to choose your spouse's characteristics either. At least not cafeteria style. You have to weigh the whole person at once, your prospective spouse and yourself as well. But when you do have the option of improving your circumstances or improving your character, you should probably consider doing it. So, with that said, also this is a long list. It ended up being longer than I thought it would be. So I am going to split these different points into 3 different episodes. And if views are any indication, it seems that you people do prefer the shorter episodes anyway. So in the next episode, we are going to look at how we can begin to pursue and prepare for marriage. After that, we are going to look at how to avoid the common ways of sabotaging our own prospects for marriage. But the rest of this episode is going to be focused on resisting temptations to sin. Basically struggling against the devil, against the world, against our own sinful flesh while we pursue marriage. So let's just get started. Number 1, don't court temptation. And this one is actually a biblical command. We're not supposed to court temptation, although the specifics I'm about to give you are not. If you want a good example, think Joseph and Potiphar's wife back in Genesis. Joseph, if you don't know the story, Joseph was a slave. His master's wife was coming on to him, and he ran out of the room, leaving his cloak behind even. Point being, he got out of Dodge when he was not able to handle it anymore, when he realized he couldn't handle it. And we need to be able to do the same to avoid putting ourselves in temptation when we don't have to, and to get out of situations where we can't handle the temptation. Now, that said, you do need to remember Jesus' words that temptation must come, but woe to the one through whom it comes. Okay? And that's the thing. We will not be able to live a temptation-free life. Okay? No matter what you do, you will be tempted. You will always be tempted. Okay? But you can make it easier on yourself by not being the one through whom your own temptation comes. And that's kind of what I'm talking about here. In other words, do not put yourself in situations where you're really going to want to be unchaste. Okay? Don't drive to a secluded spot with somebody that you're really attracted to, just to talk, where no one's going to interrupt you. Okay? Don't go to the party at the hot guy's house and then start drinking. Don't hire a beautiful secretary and take her with you on business trips. All of that's extremely obvious, of course, but, you would not believe how many people who fall into sin say something along the lines of, it just happened. I'm not really sure how we got from A to B. It just happened. Well, sex does not just happen. Okay, be smart, be cautious. And also, to avoid temptation, do not put off marriage if you are struggling with sexual temptation. And we'll talk about that more in the next episode, but do not artificially deny yourself the biblical prescription for that kind of struggle. Okay. Number 2, stay in church. Especially mean this for folks who are going to college, because when you leave for college, if you're you're living on campus, you move out of town and so forth, which is the common college experience for a lot of Americans. Once you do that, you are on your own in a way that you were not on your own before, and in many respects, most of your habits are broken simply because you are living in such a different situation than you were before you started college. It's a very different environment. You have a different set of responsibilities that you have to juggle, usually a much broader set. And that means that you have to make an effort to establish a new habit of church going and integrate that into your college life. And there are all sorts of forces, of course, at work in the college experience that make it very, very hard to live as a Christian. I'm not going to go into the long list. You all have a pretty good idea of what that entails. But you need help. You can't do that on your own. You need word and sacrament. You need to go to church. And, dropping by your home church when you visit your mom and dad every couple of months, that is not going to cut it. You need to regularly go to church. Go to church every week. And Christian organizations at your school, that's not a substitute for church. You're not getting the Lord's Supper there. You're not hearing preaching in groups like that. Some of these groups are great. They're very helpful. But it's not a substitute for the divine service. And for heaven's sake, investigate whether there is a good congregation near your college before you enroll in that college. People will make the trip, they'll visit the college, and they'll check out the gym, and they'll check out the facilities and all this sort of things, but they don't bother to stop by a worship service on Sunday at your local LCMS congregation or whatever. You need to look. You need to actually check to make sure there is a good church near the college. And if there isn't, pick a different college. Your spiritual well-being, much, much more important than which academic program you join. In the long run, the academic program probably isn't going to matter all that much. But a healthy church, that matters a lot. Huge difference there. And by the way, even if you're skipping college, which is fine, by the way, I speak to the college experience more because that's the push in our culture. You should go to college, that's what everybody says. But it's fine if you skip college. It's okay. A huge portion of college degrees are a total waste. So it's fine if you skip college and go some other route. That's great. But even when you do that, starting a life on your own, moving out of your parents' house, supporting yourself and so forth, that does have a lot of the same habit-breaking effects that going to college has. And so you do have to think about it the same way. You need to consider that, and you need to be proactive about church and about finding a good congregation if you can't stay in the same one for some reason, and maintaining your habit of going there, because that is really going to help you resist temptation in the long run. Number 3, don't pursue relationships in which you know that there is no chance for marriage. And this can happen several ways. The most common way is probably where the person isn't a keeper, it's not going to be a good relationship in the long run, but they're really hot or something like that. And that should be another really obvious one. If that's a situation, you're really attracted to the person, but they're not a good fit for you, or they're not going to make a good wife, or they're not going to make a good husband. It's your sex drive talking that says to stay with them. Okay, you're keeping them around specifically because you want to be able to fornicate with them. So don't fool yourselves. Don't maintain relationships like that. But it can also happen when you know in your head that they can be good marriage material, that they could make a good spouse for you, but you really don't want them sexually at all. And that does happen. Now, that doesn't, when you find yourself in situations like that doesn't mean you don't give them a chance, okay? I'm not saying you need to make this judgment when they ask you out on a date or when they, strike up conversation with you somewhere. It doesn't mean you don't give them a chance. People put way too much focus on that immediate spark. Like in the first 5 minutes, you're supposed to, know for sure whether you're attracted to them or not. Attraction can grow over time. It can develop later on in a relationship. But That said, there does eventually come a time when you realize that you're not going to think about them that way, or that you really don't want to think about them that way for some reason or another. And that could very well be a problem with you rather than with the other person. But, don't keep them on the hook while you're sorting yourself out. Don't keep that relationship going when you know that there's no real future there. And absolutely, don't marry them and then refuse to have sex with them, which is unfortunately what a lot of people do. When you commit to a marriage, you are both promising regular sex to your spouse, and you are removing every other option that they have for receiving that. So settle it in your minds before you marry that you are going to be having sex with this person, and you're going to be doing so when they're older than they are now, when they have a few more wrinkles. You are going to be doing so when they've put on a few pounds. And sometimes, you're going to be doing so even when you don't really feel like it at the moment. That's just part of life. It's just part of serving one another. And it's just something you have to settle in your mind beforehand, that you are not going to enter into a marriage where you are going to refuse that responsibility, because that's a grievous sin against the other person. You should not be treating another person that way, especially not treating your spouse that way. And lastly, pursuing relationships in which there's no chance of marriage. That can happen when people deliberately intend to delay marriage until they're older, which is unfortunately extremely common advice today. Don't get married until you've established yourself in a career and after you've done college and all that sort of thing. We've talked about that a lot in the first few parts of the series, and we're going to be talking about it again in the next part. But I do want to reiterate, I think putting off marriage is terrible advice in most cases, in 95% of the cases. Most people should be looking for ways to marry sooner rather than looking for new ways to put it off. But, again, that's 95%, and there is that other 5% out there. So if you really are in an exceptional circumstance, you're probably not, but if you really are, and for some reason you are sure that you're not one of the most people, for whatever reason, A, good luck, and B, if you really don't think that it's possible for you to get married within a few years, even if you found a good person, then you probably shouldn't date either. Okay, because when you're doing that, marriage is not your motivation for dating in those circumstances. And you're putting yourself in a situation where you're going to be wanting to fornicate. And if you've already decided in your mind that you can't marry, again, I think that's usually very bad advice, but if you've already decided that, probably shouldn't be dating either. Number 4, involve your parents in your relationships. And of course, the extent to which you can do this does depend on your relationship with your parents, but this is also a good reason to build and maintain a strong relationship with your parents. But don't keep them in the dark about who you're seeing, about what your relationships are like. And if you're tempted to keep your relationships hidden from them, it's probably because there's some kind of problem with your relationship. Okay, tell them about your significant others quickly, and introduce them to your significant others as soon as it's not going to scare the person off, right? I mean, that's not a first date thing, but you don't want to be putting this off for a year or something like that either. And once you do that, once you open that up, once you realize that ultimately marriage is a family affair. Your parents are going to be there at your wedding. You're going to become family to your spouse's family, and your spouse is going to become family to your family. Once you realize that, you realize it's not a good idea to keep them in the dark. And once you're open about that, it opens up a lot of options for you. It means that you can ask their advice when you need to. It means that you can let them hold accountable for your choices. If you ask them advice and they give you their honest opinion about your significant other and they don't think it's a good fit, again, it doesn't mean you have to take what they say as gospel, but you should take it seriously. You should consider whether what they're saying is true and think it through with your head and not just your heart. And it also means that if you're still looking for somebody, don't dismiss the idea of letting them make suggestions for you about prospective spouses. Doesn't mean that you have to take everyone. Doesn't mean you have to accept every suggestion that they make. But you know what? Getting set up on a blind date, not the worst thing in the world. And it could be very, very helpful for you. A lot of people complain that they have, oh, it's so hard to find the right person. But then they turn around and complain when the people closest to them in their lives actually do something to help them find the right person. And it's silly. It's ridiculous to look at it that way. So put them to work for you. Let them help you figure this out. So to sum that one up, the trope you always see on TV and in the movies is that of the meddling parents who are totally clueless and they have no idea what's good for their kids. But don't confuse TV with reality, okay? That's the lie from the devil. Your parents can be a huge help for you in resisting temptation. Use that to your advantage. And that is where we're going to pause this for now. So please, as usual, like, comment, share, subscribe. And please join us next time when we consider some of the positive ways that we can prepare for and pursue marriage.